very short congressional perspective, they've been listening carefully for years now, and have, some of them had draft legislation in the mix before the pandemic, through the pandemic, after the pandemic. And we asked the Chief of Staff for Robin Kelly, who addressed us here last year, to come say, okay, now that we've seen some things and we see political will growing, and we see more things like Change Healthcare, we have a proposal from HHS, we're gonna hear that next. That came out in December, but since then, Change Healthcare has happened. We've learned a bolt typhoon from the cybersecurity agency leads, and things are getting scarier with ascension attacks. So we want to get some congressional perspective, and we are lucky enough on, I think, this day off to come to hear the Chief of Staff, excited to be this day off, Chief of Staff for Robin Kelly, to give us at least a perspective from the House.
All right, thank you, Josh. So, Matt, in preparation for this conversation, I went back and looked, and I met you in January 2020, just before COVID took over all the media headlines. It was for a Hackers on the Hill event, and you were a legislative assistant with Representative Kelly, and now you are the Chief of Staff. So 4 years, legislative assistant, Chief of Staff. That's pretty good. And for someone who is focused on cybersecurity, it is rare to have that become the person who takes over Chief of Staff. But I think that is both a testament to how focused you are on doing a good job at your job, no matter what you're given, as well as the importance that your boss puts towards cybersecurity. And she has been involved in a couple of big pieces of legislation for around technology and cybersecurity that I've been tracking. One is the IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act of 2020 that finally got passed and signed into law. And I think that there's more taking effect this year with that, which was, I think, a phenomenal piece of teamwork between the House side, the Senate side, Democrats, Republicans. It was a true bicameral, bipartisan effort, as well as the Patch Act. And for those who don't know, that had a profound impact on healthcare because when I was at FDA, we were asking for some of the capability, or we were asking medical device makers to do cybersecurity as part of their devices. And they were pushing back saying, well, Congress didn't give you this authority, so we don't think you have it. And so the FDA said, well, we just go ask them. I mean, and so finally that got passed into law, and it turns out you did intend to give them the ability to be able to regulate safety and effectiveness with cybersecurity. So I just wanted to recognize that history of your work and your boss's work, and out of curiosity, understand, and maybe you can tell us, how did you start tracking that intersection of technology, which clearly you in the office have been cared about for a while, and healthcare?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that too generous of an introduction, Bo. And thank you, Josh, and for everyone hearing amazing stories today. My boss is a member from Illinois, and she serves on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has broad jurisdiction and specifically over healthcare in the House. And she's also the Congressional Black Caucus's healthcare brain trust leader. And so she does a lot of things on healthcare, especially around maternal health. And around the time that the IoT bill was about to become law, I was on a panel and someone asked a question and said they were a hospital administrator and said, this all sounds great, but we just don't have the resources as a hospital to comply with something like this. It's just too burdensome. We don't have the expertise. We're just trying to cover our patient costs. I don't know how we could do this. And so I thought that was really interesting and also worrying. And so I brought that back to my boss and told her, and she was like, well, why don't you look more into this? And so I had conversations with researchers and HHS, and it was pretty clear that there were some huge red flags and some big concerns around healthcare, and started digging into it more and having different conversations. And unfortunately, we saw the wave of ransomware attacks that have continued to this day and have put this issue more at the forefront. And it's pretty clear that unfortunately the steps that have been taken haven't really moved us forward. And I think that there is more that needs to be done if we're really going to stop this continued persistence of attacks on the healthcare system.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and with the headlines kind of being dominated, especially recently in cybersecurity news and in a lot of healthcare news of things like Ascension, things like Change Healthcare, and these other things that are showing the interconnectedness, interdependency of healthcare with other sectors, with other risks, and with technology itself. It's unsurprising that there's a lot of attention in the House and in the Senate. And I have heard, and I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I've heard that there is maybe going to be some action sometime soon, maybe from your office. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what you're thinking about. I'm not asking for details of anything you might be putting up, but what are you thinking about in terms of how to scope that, how it could deal with the causes and the catastrophic effects of ransomware and other cybersecurity challenges in healthcare?
Yeah, I think over the past few years, we've really tried to kind of gear our conversations towards not just doing a band-aid, but actually seeing how do we address this issue as a whole. And I commend the administration for pushing on companies and having ARPA-H create new tools, but I don't think that at the end of the day is going to be the fix that we need, and there is a legislative need here. And so we've kind of pursued 4 kind of steps in the legislation that we've been readying. The first is focused on just organization at HHS. I know there's an announcement fairly recently where they're looking to reorganize internally, and I think that's great. I think there were a lot of silos of excellence where teams were not talking to each other. There wasn't clear who people should be going to. There wasn't clear coordination with CISA, with FDA, and so looking at that. Also, should it be housed in ASPR? Is that the right home for cybersecurity? I'm not sure. And so, how do we think about structuring HHS to be most effective to protect healthcare cybersecurity is kind of the first part. The second part is focused on standards. It was pretty worrying to see the cybersecurity performance goals and see essential goals not include, network segmentation, asset inventory, third-party vulnerability disclosure. Those are pretty essential items. Whenever I talk with experts, they say that those are some of the most important. If you don't know what's on your network, how can you be expected to protect it? That seems pretty fundamental to me. And I think that we need to create a higher floor and set of standards so that all healthcare systems are more resilient from attacks in the future. The third part, if we're going to be raising the floor, we recognize that we need to be providing more resources. And so looking at 4 or 5D resources, we kind of wanted to target the most efficient way possible. And so looking at a grant program focused on small and medium-sized hospitals, it's about 300 beds or less, and providing a grant funds where they can use that for software, for hardware, but also for hiring talent, because that's one of the big things that we've heard is we don't have the people to implement this, or we have a person who's wearing 3 hats, who's this is their third responsibility is trying to protect the network, and that's just worrying. And I think that we need to be really thinking about staffing at smaller, especially rural hospitals and health centers. And then the fourth part is a lot of large hospital systems, university types, partner with smaller health systems, health centers, and we want to encourage them to be good actors because they've said they want to be, and provide cybersecurity resources to them. And in exchange, we'll give them liability protection so that if a hack does occur at a small, health center, they're not liable and they couldn't be sued for them getting hacked. And so we think, we're trying to pursue the right balance, understanding expensing funds is always difficult in Congress, but we think we need to address kind of all four of these areas if we're really going to harden the healthcare system in this country.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and that draws on themes that we've heard throughout the day, with especially, Nate earlier talked about the parts of his organization that didn't get hit with ransomware were the parts that were segmented off. So clearly that's a pretty strong control. And we heard about the I guess, desire for some of those larger healthcare centers to be able to provide some of their resources to the smaller ones. So I think that falls in line with a lot of the stuff that we've heard in this room today from some of the folks. But as the security person, I am the eternal pessimist, and watching the hill from the outside, it seems like, at least from the news, there's never been a worse time to get something done. Even something as bipartisan support, bicameral support as cybersecurity, as doing something about healthcare ransomware. So what do you think the mood is like in Congress for something like this? Do you think there's a willingness to pass it? Or are some of the other factors and considerations, the broader, bigger picture things that are happening, are those going to get in the way of getting this out?
I think it is, the first positive thing is, like you said, it is a bipartisan issue. I think Republicans, Democrats agree on this issue, and honestly on just the importance of healthcare. My boss recently started with Republican Troy Balderson of Ohio, a digital health caucus, and part of that is to talk about the potential benefits of digital health, the different changes in the field, and specifically to educate members of Congress on what's happening in the field, because members are stretched, they're doing 10,000 different things. If you're not on the committee of relevancy, you're probably not tracking an issue, and so this was a way to kind of bring members together, have conversations, bring in experts, and kind of raise the education level across the field. And I think, we've been working on this bill, we've had some text thrown around, we've had some positive discussions with Republicans. Getting that final yes has been a little elusive, as there's been staff turnover and other priorities and shifts, but I'm confident that people are increasingly going to see that this is not going to go away. Unfortunately, with ransomware attacks, the people keep paying it, and it keeps getting headlines, and so it's just going to incentivize more people to keep trying it. And until we really take the steps necessary to address this, we're not going to see the necessary changes in the market that's going to deter actors from continuing to target, healthcare, which I think last month set a record for the number of attacks. So it's just an issue that we've had, I think, 2 hearings before Energy and Commerce on the House side. The Senate has had hearings. This is not an issue that's going to go away, and I think the testimony we heard today from the nurse at Ascension was very moving, and I think members of Congress would definitely be interested in hearing that perspective on the Hill.
So 2015 Cybersecurity, what was it? Information Sharing Act, I think. I forget the acronym. It's a CISA 2015 called for HHS to run a cybersecurity task force. That task force finished, published in 2017. The front page of that task force report, it said healthcare cybersecurity is in critical condition. 2017, 7 years ago now. And just recently, earlier this year, I saw that the sector published a plan that said we will emerge from critical condition in 2029. So 12 years of being in critical condition from when we recognized it. And a large part of that has been, a spotlight has been shined on that from ransomware, these ransomware attacks. As one of my friends, Tom Millar, calls it, self-discovering cyber attacks, or self-discovering malware. I guess this is maybe I'll limit it, but why has it been so difficult to get action in Congress or get traction and kind of buy-in in Congress to do something about ransomware, particularly with all the high-profile ransomware attacks. And given that this room has some pretty amazing talent, some pretty amazing insight to some of the ransomware challenges, what would you ask of this room to give to you?
Well, I think, there's always issues competing for members' time, and so that makes it particularly difficult. There are a lot of different stakeholders in healthcare that make this particularly difficult to navigate. With any bill, you will hear positive things back, you will hear negative things back. Some groups are more vocal than others, and some are more represented in certain districts than in other districts. But unfortunately, what I think is true is this impacts every district. My boss's district is urban, suburban, and rural. It starts in Chicago, and it goes 150 miles south along the Indiana border, and it includes over 2,000 farms. And we have some very rural areas where, if one, health center went down, it would be very critical, and people would have to bypass and drive for hours to receive their care. And I think that is true in a lot of parts of the country, and it's one of those unfortunate things where it probably is going to have to happen to more people before they realize and prioritize it as an issue for them. For these issues generally, whenever you're talking about funding, that produces some heartache for some on the other side of the aisle. We've been in talks with appropriators because if you're moving funds around within an agency for their reorganization, you want to make sure the funds are going in the right places as well. And in terms of trying to just move this issue forward, it took 5 years for us to get past the IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act. It's not you introduce a bill and it becomes law immediately. The first version of a bill you introduce is not the version of the bill that's going to become law. I hope this doesn't take 5 years to move this discussion, so we aren't actually at 29 when we're, when we actually can get this bill passed into law, hopefully. But the legislative process does take some time, and there are people, in the House and the Senate who do take these issues very seriously and who are wanting to move it forward. And to the people in the audience, I will say, please let me know, let our team know, what is the actual truth on the ground, because it is very helpful to hear the personal stories, how hospitals, how health networks are set up, and what we should be knowing and what we're not hearing, because we don't know what we don't know. So we always value your feedback and knowing what we should be tweaking, where you think there needs to be more emphasis. So please engage with us. I've had a member of our team here today since I haven't been able to be here the whole time. So don't be shy. And in general, don't be afraid to talk to your members of Congress. Let them know that this is an issue, that this is something important, that this is something they should be caring about and prioritizing. Because if they don't hear about it from people, they won't know. During the Change Healthcare attack, my boss was getting texts from providers in her district saying, "Oh my God, do you know about this? Why isn't Congress doing something?" When members of Congress are getting those texts, they immediately turn to their staff and say, "Why didn't you tell me about this?" So please, use your voice, talk to your members, and that's really going to be the only way that we can move this forward at a quick pace and get some real change. But thank you both.
All right, Matt, thank you. And we're running a little bit late, so we don't have any time for questions. But everybody, thank Matt McMurry for coming out. And